Hi, it's Pastor Steve here in beautiful Visalia, California. This is Scrolls, Stones, and Scriptures, a slow, thorough walk through the Torah in the Old Testament. We are in the midst of the story of Abraham and Sarah. It's late in their life. They have had Isaac with a great celebration, and now the story takes a little bit of a darker but more interesting turn. I'll start by reading Scripture, and then we'll break down what we find in Scripture for this week. So here is the Scripture. The child grew and was weaned, and that refers to Isaac. And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." A note for later on in the discussion, that's turned out to be wildly prophetic. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, "Do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring." Again, the Old Testament absolutely predicts our current status as well as most of recorded history between these two events, the celebration of Isaac's birth and the modern day. It continues on. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. Abraham's always a good guy, isn't he? Really, he takes care of people. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy, because we all know from the previous story, Sarah's a danger to Hagar and to the boy. She went on her way and wandered into the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes, and then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away, for she thought, "I cannot watch the boy die." And as she sat there, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Again, absolutely going to come true. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert, and he became an archer while he was living in the desert of Paran. His mother got a wife for him from Egypt. And that concludes the reading of Scripture this morning. Lots of aspects to touch on. None of them need to be touched on too long. So the name Ishmael means, literal translation, God hears. So it's a description of Hagar's experience when her son was in the bush and she was mourning his imminent death. God heard the cry of the boy, and the angel came in and talked to her. So that's a lovely thing. God hears is the name Ishmael. And the story parallels in some aspects the story of Abraham and Isaac that is still to come. Abraham, as you know, will take Isaac to sacrifice him to the Lord, an ancient Mesopotamian custom, and the intervention of God in that act of sacrifice of the firstborn to God sets up much of the theological understanding that we have of the character of God and the process of salvation. And the elements are, right, a parent wandering with their child who is dedicated to God. God's intervention in the death of the child brings about a change in the direction of the relationship of the parent with God, and assures the future of that tribe or that particular people. So this story has all of those elements in it too. It is worth noting, and kind of the center of the lesson today, at least as far as I'm going to teach it, Ishmael is the father of Arabs. Arabs are the mainstay of the Muslim faith. The faith in Muhammad has started in that area of the world. In addition, the Arabs or the Ishmaelites, the tribe and later the nation that came from Ishmael, were long-term enemies of the Israelites once they move into Canaan and set up camp and set up their nation. They are bitter enemies. It's kind of a family feud type of thing, right? They are forever related through Abraham, but they are just long-term foes. Each of the people, the Israelites and the Ishmaelites, send people or otherwise participate in wars against the other one. So they ally with the enemies of their cousins or half brothers, however you want to see it. And there's a long history of that. It's also probable that during the Babylonian exile, at that part of history, that the Ishmaelites and the Israelites were exiled together. And it is possible, though we don't really have any record of it, that being exiled together heightened the dislike for one another. It certainly heightened in the Israelites, in the Jewish people who were in exile, a sense of self and a sense of the import of community. And if it did that for the Israelites, it probably did it for the Ishmaelites also. So from the time that this story began to be recited verbally and then came to be written down, eventually became a part of the Torah, to the present day, the things that occur and are predicted in the story continue to be true. As you are well aware, the nation of Israel and the many nations of Islam are and have been since the recreation of Israel in a bitter to the death war mindset. They despise each other from the river to the sea. That saying is talked about a great deal today, and it is a threat, right, to destroy the Jewish people completely and wholly from the face of the earth. So the enmity between the two groups begins there. Of course, there weren't Muslims until very late in history, but the Muslims came out of the Arab tribes, and the Arab tribes have always been at war with the people who we call Jewish or the Israelites, the residents of Judah and Israel. So it's fascinating. Say what you want to about the Bible being some kind of old wives' tale or stories that are made up. There's certainly a ton in the Old Testament in these stories, which can be traced through history. And for me, anyway, it adds to the validity of the belief that what is written in Scripture is true, right? It is written in a certain style and with certain aims, but the core history at play is correct and accurate. In this case, the history of the enmity between Israel and one of its fiercest enemies throughout all of time, including today, is traced back to the origin, both children of Abraham, but one, the favored son of Abraham, who grows up with Abraham and stays with Abraham. The other one, an effort by Abraham's wife Sarah to give Abraham an heir that turned bad. Sarah caused it it was her idea, and then she caused it to turn bad, and she wanted the child and the mother gone. There was great jealousy between them, and that ends up producing a line of people who will forever be allied against Abraham, or against Abraham's line. And so it will go, I guess, until we get to the book of Revelation. It really is a point of interest to me. Let's talk about this in this way also. It's interesting. We are in the story of Abraham at a point where God is differentiating Abraham and his particular tribe from every other tribe in the world at that time. And we know that relationship will continue through the patriarchy. So the God Yahweh, right, will introduce himself to and be a part of the life of all of what we call the patriarchy, cleared down through the line until the time of the Christ, when Jesus comes on the scene. And up until the time Jesus comes on the scene, there are great themes in play, and they progress. One of those great themes is the culling of the Jewish people from the customs and practices and beliefs of all the other people, right? So the chosen people, that phrase tells us, is a nice way to describe what the Old Testament shows us in detail, which is God slowly but surely took Abraham and his people through the generations out of the mix of the regular world, and he made them a special people with a special covenant. They lived radically differently under Jewish law than anybody around them. That doesn't change. That mindset of we are the children of Yahweh, Yahweh is our God, and all other gods are false, that increases all throughout the Old Testament. It doesn't change ever really until you get to the New Testament. And then with the advent of the Christ event, a fundamental shift takes place. And it bears on our scripture today and kind of the story as it's unfolding. That fundamental shift is in Jesus, what happens is suddenly, instead of a continued differentiation from all of the pagans and all of the unclean people in the world, Jesus spends his time reaching out to and encouraging relationship with people who are not Jewish, who are unclean. And he treats them the same as he does Jewish people. In fact, you could make a case that he often treats them better than he does. And the church that grows out of the Jesus movement is a church dedicated to bringing the truth of Yahweh, the truth of the living God, to non-Jewish people at a fundamental level. That's never happened in Jewish history before. So we see the beginning cleavage of the chosen people away, in this case, from Ishmael and Hagar, right? Different tribes are developing, and that continues. It continues until Christ, at which point the will of Yahweh is manifest fully by the revelation that in Jesus, Yahweh is calling all nations and all people to him, where once he called a tribe in order to create out of them the kind of the seed bed, is how I see it, of the Christ. So it's hard to make a fundamentally fine point on it, but it is fascinating to me to understand that this is the beginning of the separation of and the selection of the chosen people. But in time, that will change into the chosen people, or one who came from the chosen people becomes the great uniter of all people. And that would mean that at some point, Ishmaelites and Israelites will again be brothers, and they'll be proper brothers this time instead of the beginning of blood enemies. So let's see here. For the record, I'm not a Muslim scholar, but I know that the Muslims read this story and they read it differently, right? So they look at it as the birth of Ishmael and the birth of their people, and so they have a kind of a very different interpretation. They're fond of Abraham, everybody is, but they're not so fond of Isaac, of course, being blood enemies of his tribe. They wouldn't be. But they do agree, the fundamental agreement is that both faith traditions, the Muslim faith and the Jewish faith, and in fact the Christian faith, all center their being and their sense of self in the story of Abraham, this person in history whose impact was enormous as it played out. Let's see if there's a takeaway at all. For me, when I read this story today in this part of my life, I am reminded that though I have my share of people that I disagree with, and even people that I have called enemies and believe to be my enemies who I think seek to harm me, I think everybody has a little bit of that in their life. I'm reminded that thinking in those terms is detrimental to the Christian foundation. And I remember that for all of the reasons that people become separate and aggressive towards each other and learn to despise each other, and everybody always has good reasons for those. For all of that, the commandment of Jesus that really sets apart those who follow him from all the rest of the world is that we're supposed to figure out a way internally in our hearts and souls first around that divide so that we see not our enemies but human beings. And if we can, we're supposed to gracefully enter into the stream of our enemies' lives in such a way that we win them over to friendship and to a following of Jesus. So where once history records that Yahweh wanted people separated out so he could work especially with one group, it also records that wasn't the final plan. The final plan is for people to come back together And those who follow Jesus are inheritors of Jesus' promise, and that is that grace will help eventually overcome all the things that divide us. Kind of, I don't know, that's the best summation or the best idea, but that's kind of where my mind goes. I do hope that you're enjoying this series. I'm having a blast preparing it and thinking about it and engaging in it with you. If you're enjoying it, please alert other people. Tell them to log on and take a listen. You can do that at the Visalia Methodist Church.org website or on YouTube. Just type in Scrolls, Stones, and Scriptures or Pastor Steve Creel, and you'll come up with all kinds of stuff. Hit the like button, hit the bell, do whatever you're supposed to do. I'm not really worried about amassing a bunch of followers, but I do like to share the information that we've had and what I hope is an enjoyable ride. So I hope it's a beautiful day wherever you are, and remember, you can make it beautiful inside in your life and other people's lives if only you'll lead with grace. God bless.